What does HGTV, tennis, pharmacies, and the New York Globe have in common? My. Another episode of the Gilded Age. Hey everyone, this is D Movie Man, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, of course, I'm coming to you all with another episode of The Gilded Age, Season 2, Episode 2, Some Kind of Trick. This episode was directed by Deborah Kampmeier, who is a director and screenwriter, and has directed films like Virgin and Hound Dog, along with series like Queen Sugar, Cherish the Day, Clarice, and Star Trek Discovery, among others. This episode was also written by Julian Fellows. So we open up this episode seeing George as the go-between for Bertha and Gladys, as they seem to be very frustrated with each other at the present moment. Gladys has no intentions of traveling to Newport, as there is a pressing matter that concerns her. That matter, of course, is Oscar Van Ryn. George has received his letter, and he's open to meeting with him for an interview. Now, while he has said nothing to Bertha about this, what he does intend to say to Bertha or Oscar largely depends upon what Gladys wants him to say. All Gladys knows is that what she desires most is freedom, and George makes it very clear that marriage is not the place to look for freedom. He's got a point. Gladys then attempts to list all the reasons why she and Oscar will make a good match. But it's obvious that love is not factoring in anywhere on that list. So George makes Gladys an offer. He promises to support her choice whenever she tells him that she has fallen in love. And yes, even if it's against Bertha's wishes. As for Oscar, George will just let him down gently, and then they can forget about the whole thing. Besides, if there's one thing George knows, is that his daughter is far too good for Oscar Van Ryn. And I agree. Despite some passive-aggressive barbs from Agnes regarding Marian's choice to take a packed lunch with her, we then see Marian at her watercolors class. It's clear that Frances is very flustered and frustrated with her progress, but Marian encourages her to move past her fear of failure. Afterwards, Frances and Dashiell offer the use of their carriage to Marian and to pay a visit to Agnes. Next, we see Oscar meeting with George, and to make a long story short, the answer is no. Despite Oscar's retorts and attempts to explain himself, George dismisses him completely. We also see Peggy meeting with Marian and Agnes, and at this point, Peggy is just ready to be busy again. And as for Armstrong, Agnes will handle that herself. Next, we see Bertha, Larry, and Mr. McAllister in Newport meeting with Mrs. Blaine, the widow that was discussed in the previous episode. Mrs. Blaine has offered Larry the opportunity to assess her home and provide feedback on what can be improved structurally and aesthetically. And the answer is a lot. Unfortunately, everything is either too cramped or too dark. Larry feels the home would be much improved with additional space and an abundance of light. And I was like, listen, HGTV 1883, I am here for it. I love it. I'm telling you, I am a HGTV addict. I couldn't even tell you the amount of shows I watch. Growing up in the 90s, you become used to a certain type of aesthetic and you become used to, rooms and, the structure of homes looking a certain way. So then to get older and realize, wow, there's so many ways a space can change just by removing a wall, just by interior design. Like there's so much you can do. So the fact that this is a part of Larry's career aspirations and we get to see that, yeah, I was actually really, really excited. Both Bertha and Larry are surprised when Mrs. Blaine decides to hire Larry outright. But for Mrs. Blaine, she feels that her instinct to hire him is a necessary one. Larry also mentions that he'll be headed to the Newport Lawn Tournament on the 12th, so he'll have to take that day off. When Mrs. Blaine mentions how long it's been since she's visited the casino, Larry invites her to join him. And of course, Bertha cannot resist throwing in a very passive-aggressive jab about Larry socializing with a very young crowd and Mrs. Blaine possibly feeling out of place. As Mrs. Blaine shows Larry the rest of the house, Mr. McAllister informs Bertha about a gentleman named Mr. Winterton. He, of course, is very wealthy with old money and has one of the first cottages built in Newport. However, his new young wife may hold the key to helping Bertha gain a foothold in the current opera war. Next, we see Ada, Marian, and Agnes enjoying the visit with Reverend Forte. They learn a lot of information about him, including his mother's passing and his not being married. After he leaves, Ada mentions how much she enjoys entertaining and that they should do it more often. Agnes feels a little differently, considering how Ada and Reverend Forte basically monopolized the conversation, and she would like to know what chatter pills Ada took before the visit. Jumping over to George, we see that the Union Task Force is continuing to mobilize, as 2,000 workers have recently walked off the job in Chicago. George is unclear as to how they can get a hold of these unions, especially when their numbers keep increasing exponentially. And then there's the matter of Bill Henderson, who now represents the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers in Pittsburgh. George has no intention of yielding to union requests, but doing nothing is no longer an option. So instead, he will send his secretary, Richard Clay, to Pittsburgh to buy Henderson off. After all, power is very seductive.
The universe is mine to command, to control!
But for Mr. Clay, all of this is to no avail. Mr. Henderson just won't be bought. But George hasn't given up just yet. For now, he'll place him in a suite at the Brunswick and invite him for a lunch date at his home. Next, we see Mr. McNeil looking around the Russell household, specifically the servants' entrance. Church is confused about what's happening, but Mr. McNeil informs him that he's looking for the footman Collier, whom we of course know as Watson, the valet. George arrives in the midst of this, and he invites Mr. McNeil in for a conversation. However, said conversation does not go anywhere because Mr. McNeil is leery about revealing the secret behind his request for Mr. Collier. So it would seem that Watson is safe for the moment. But when he and Church have a discussion later, he confesses his relationship to the McNeils and realizes that he will likely be hearing from his son-in-law again very soon. We see Agnes informing Armstrong that Peggy will be returning. Armstrong says here, Agnes is like, no, Timbuktu. Yes, here. But Agnes makes it clear that she doesn't want any trouble, despite the intentional trouble that Armstrong started for Peggy once she arrived. She also makes it clear to Armstrong that she will only treat Peggy with kindness and respect. Armstrong says, well, what if she's unkind to me? Agnes says, then, knowing Miss Scott, I'd say you had it coming. I said, get her, Agnes, come on. The other option is unemployment. Of course, Armstrong gets very, emotional. She's just like, no, and, what it will be, like, basically her job opportunities and the ability to get another job is going to be, like, next to nothing. And, she's not handling it well, which technically is understandable given what we saw of her home life last season. But as Agnes herself states, Armstrong's fate is in her own hands. When Armstrong attempts to retort again, Agnes bucks up and she says, I think you have mistaken this for a discussion when what I'm giving you is an order. In other words, she can fall in line or she can find another job. Next, we see Peggy visiting her father at his pharmacy. And I have to tell you, just seeing that shot of all the Black-owned businesses in Brooklyn during this time and just imagining like what that would look like in person. Now, I don't know if time travel will ever become a thing, but man, I could only imagine what it would be like to walk down this street and just see this flourishing Black neighborhood and community and these businesses in person. I love it. And just seeing the slice of history represented in this show, it will always put a smile on my face. Always. Peggy then has a tense conversation with her father where she informs him that she'll be returning to 61st Street. Arthur feels that taking time away from family is not what a real family does. But Peggy makes it clear, look, it's a lot of things that's going on in this family that are not reflective of a real family either. So in the meantime, I need my space. But Peggy does feel that with time, all wounds may be healed. And yes, even between her mother and father. Next, we see Marian, Agnes, and Ada meeting with Aurora when Agnes receives an invitation from Mrs. Astor. And the invitation is with regards to a meeting in which they can devise a strategy to combat the Metropolitan. Aurora also invites Marian to Newport for the tennis tournament and Mr. McAllister's ball, where she will also be meeting an acquaintance of hers. As there is currently a midterm break for St. Mary's, Marian will be present and accounted for. It turns out that the potential suitor is none other than Edward Morgan, who works at Aurora's husband's bank. Since Agnes is familiar with his mother, Arabella Morgan, who was born in Winthrop, Agnes is more than excited for Marian to meet him. Marian is excited as well. Well, for Newport in any case. Speaking of Newport, we see Larry discussing with Mrs. Blaine the plans for her home's upcoming refurbishment. Larry is worried about the disruption this might cause, but let Mrs. Blaine tell it, she spent 20 years with a man who couldn't bear to use a different spoon with his egg in the morning. So a little disruption will be just fine. After a very quiet and unfulfilling life as a married woman, Mrs. Blaine is ready to celebrate a new life with new people. Larry hopes that he might be one of those new people. Mrs. Blaine says, "You already are." We then see Peggy gathered together with the staff of the Van Ryn household, and from the laughter and joy and good vibes we're seeing, Peggy has absolutely been missed. But of course, the moment is ruined when the dark cloud that is Armstrong makes her way into the room. And as always, she can't help but be her usual passive-aggressive self towards Peggy. Let me say really quickly that I was cracking up when I saw Bannister's face when Armstrong entered the room. He was just kind of like, why are you here? He was over it. We then jump forward to Newport, where we see Marian visiting with Mr. Morgan. And if her face is any indication, she is having a less than pleasant experience. But at least Oscar is there, so she doesn't have to suffer alone. And she is also relieved when she sees that Larry is there as well. Larry is there with Mrs. Blaine to see his friend Dick Sears from Harvard play in the tournament. Marian then makes her escape from Mr. Morgan to chat with Larry, and they discuss his current career aspirations and the progress he's making. And it's a great moment because we saw last season where Marian was encouraging him about his aspirations to be an architect and his career, so the fact that he's doing just that, she's really, really happy about it. She's also introduced to Mrs. Blaine, but when Mr. Morgan attempts to make his way over again, Oscar quickly shoos her off to Gladys. Like I said, Oscar is definitely coming in clutch, and I appreciate it. Gladys and Marian then have a brief chat about the expectations placed on them as far as marriage. But that comes to an end when Mr. Morgan finally tracks Marian down and she reluctantly accompanies him. I know this is going to sound really random, but when I saw Mr. Morgan and they just kept showing him, all I thought was Bill Nye the Science Guy. I know that's random, but that is all I kept thinking of. If they did a Bill Nye the Science Guy biopic, I was like, this might be a good candidate. Charles and Aurora actually feel compelled to apologize to Marian because this is not the same person that they knew from the bank. It's clear to me that the liquor has something to do with it, but also I think that the professional obligations of a job, it can rein people in, but then when you see them outside of that profession in real life, it's like, whoa, all right. No, thank you. Thankfully, it's Cousin Dashiell to the rescue, and Aurora quickly sends Marian off with him. She also helps Dashiell secure a win by offering the name of Dick Sears for a $50 bet. Mind you, $50 in 1883 would amount to about $1,300 to $1,500 today. And speaking of the real-life Dick Sears, also known as Richard Sears, He won the U.S. National Championship singles in its first 7 years from 1881 to 1887, and the doubles for 6 years from 1882 to 1887. We see Church and Bannister meet briefly, and Church does apologize for the letter he wrote last season. It is clear that Bannister might forgive, but he is not forgetting anytime soon. And as far as what that means for their relationship in the future, only time will tell. Next, we see Jack and Adelheid, who we also know as the footman for the Van Ryn household and the personal lady's maid to Gladys Russell. Now, in the first episode, we saw that they were getting to know each other and that they were developing a real bond. And that continues here when Adelheid is telling Jack about how she's worried because she has forgotten to pack a dress for Bertha for the ball in Newport, and Jack is just there to encourage her and, just assures her that everything will work out just fine. Adelheid is grateful for this, and she hopes that after her return from Newport, that they can have more conversations and coffee. However, in Newport, we discover that Larry and Mrs. Blaine are sharing much more than coffee together. Yeah, so it looks like a May-December romance is now blooming on the horizon. But not if Bertha has anything to say about it. Surprisingly, Larry is very straightforward about where he's been and what or who he's been doing. I'm sorry. You instead, boys. Bertha does not understand what Larry could possibly want with a woman twice his age when there are plenty of suitable young ladies for him to pursue. Larry says the fact that she's nothing like those suitable young ladies is the exact reason why he's pursuing her. And he doesn't think that Bertha wants him to elaborate on that. I said, not you trying to hint at the bedroom proclivities and performance. Oh my. And not to your mother.
I am shooketh.
And the conversation gets even more intense, and Bertha and Larry are raising their voices at each other. And ultimately, Bertha does not want there to be a scandal and anything that could come at the expense of his good name. I was like, technically, you're talking about your good name, if we're being honest, but okay, I digress. But regardless, Bertha is not changing Larry's mind on this subject. Next, we see Peggy meeting with Mr. Fortune at the New York Globe, and Peggy is just ready for a new assignment, and she's trying to stay busy so that she can put her grief behind her. Mr. Fortune does understand because he and his wife lost a baby boy just a few years prior. Additionally, we see Peggy interacting with the staff again, and she has helped Bridget with the sewing for Armstrong because Bridget was not able to do it all herself. But of course, Armstrong cannot just take the favor for what it is, and she has to express her surprise that Peggy was even allowed back in the house. And Peggy has had it. She's like, you know what, Miss Armstrong? I have no quarrel with you, okay? However, I promise you do not want one with me. I said, thank you, Peggy. Come on. Look, I'm all for being chill, composed, polite, and that's me on a regular basis. But sometimes you just have to get somebody up off of you and make it clear okay, I've given you once, I've given you twice, 3 strikes, it's going down. Okay? So I was so happy to see this because Peggy has been too kind for too long. And if Armstrong is really going to take it there, then that's cool. Because you best believe my girl is ready.
How about that?
We then jump forward to Mr. McAllister's ball at the casino. We see Bertha and Mr. McAllister discussing how Bertha has now been asked to be the chairman of the Metropolitan's fundraising, where she'll be finding takers for the boxes. Mr. McAllister mentions how the war of the opera houses is heating up, and Bertha mentions that eventually he'll have to pick a team. But Mr. McAllister is like, no. I am perfectly content riding the fence because no matter the outcome, I will emerge from this looking like the loyal and supportive confidant in any case, which I understand. But as was mentioned before, as soon as Bertha meets with the Wintertons, she can convince them to have a box in both opera houses. We also see Oscar being introduced to a Miss Maud Beaton, who appears to have a somewhat complicated past. Officially, her father is the late John Beaton, but it has been said that her real father, her biological father, might be none other than Jay Gould. Now, this is just a rumor, but she does seem to have a great deal of money at her disposal, as well as a paid companion in New York, which is why Aurora has also introduced her to Oscar. We see Dashiell and Marian interacting, and Dashiell once again steps in to save the day by offering a dance to Marian, just as Mr. Morgan is attempting to do the very same thing. Next, we see Mr. McAllister introducing Bertha and George to the Wintertons. And look, I already knew something was up by the way they were showing the back of Mrs. Winterton, and even when they showed Mr. McAllister coming towards them from the front, her face was still hidden behind him. So I was like, okay, clearly something's up. But for whatever reason, it didn't occur to me. Like I didn't what's the big deal? Well, as soon as her face is revealed, Bertha realizes with a great degree of shock and horror that Mrs. Winterton is none other than Turner, her former lady's maid, who is now officially her neighbor in Newport. Well, they don't call it the land of opportunity for nothing. Welcome to America. And that closes out episode 2, Some Kind of Trick. Wow. That ending threw me. And listen, I knew Turner was probably going to make another appearance. I knew the way that she left the last season, it was too easy. It was just like, there's something else going on. But this, And what's crazy is that Turner was the main one talking about how, Bertha was new money and she knows nothing of old money, and she'll never be a part of that class or society and da. But ironically enough, she is now married to a man who is of the old money and the old society. So it's kind of like now, technically speaking, she kind of has you beat. You know what I'm saying? So that is crazy. And of course, she needs her to get a foothold with this whole opera house war. Yo, I'm excited. I'm not gonna lie. I am excited. Bring it on. And I'm so glad to be getting this out. And since at this point, the new episode will be coming out tomorrow, I'm gonna trying to keep up and stay consistent and be timely. So you guys can definitely expect that next recap very soon. But as far as this recap, please feel free to drop down below and leave your thoughts on this recap and the episode in general. So, once again, this is D, Movie Man, signing off, and I'll see you at the movies.